Every era of this sport has produced pitches that break every rule a hitter's brain relies on to make a decision in under half a second. Not illegal, not even rare necessarily, just physically, mathematically unfair. Built to arrive looking like one pitch and behave like a completely different one by the time it matters. A major league fastball takes roughly 0.4 of a second to travel from release to the plate, and a hitter has to commit to a swing somewhere around the halfway point of that flight, which means every single pitch on this list is winning its fight in a window of time too short for conscious thought to keep up. The 8 pitches we're about to walk through didn't earn their reputation by being thrown the hardest. They earned it by being the hardest to correctly guess, in a sport where guessing wrong by even a few inches is the entire difference between a home run and an embarrassing swing through nothing but air. 8 of them changed the sport enough to earn a permanent seat in the conversation about the nastiest stuff ever thrown. Let's go through what actually makes each one so miserable to face. The sweeper. Start with the pitch that took over the league almost overnight. A sweeper is a breaking ball engineered for horizontal movement, sometimes a 1.5 foot of side-to-side break at the plate, thrown with a grip and wrist angle that maximizes side spin instead of the downward spin a traditional slider relies on. Visually, it looks like a fastball for the first 2/3 of its flight, then simply changes lanes, sweeping across the entire width of the strike zone in the blink of an eye. It's worth sitting with how recently this pitch went from a niche experiment to a league-wide standard. A handful of seasons ago, most pitching coaches would have described this exact shape of breaking ball as a flaw, a slider that didn't have enough depth, thrown by a pitcher who hadn't found the right grip yet. Today, entire pitching development departments actively coach pitchers into throwing more of it on purpose, which is a rare case of the sport looking back at what used to be considered a mistake and deciding it had been an accidental weapon the whole time. What makes it so miserable to face isn't the break itself, it's the decision window it destroys. A hitter's brain is trained to commit to a swing based on the first 40 feet of a pitch's flight, and a sweeper spends exactly that stretch of the flight path lying to him. By the time the actual movement shows up, the swing decision has usually already been made, which means most swings against a well-thrown sweeper aren't really swings at the pitch at all. They're swings at wherever the pitch used to be. Part of what makes the sweeper such a modern phenomenon is that it didn't really exist as a mainstream weapon until pitch tracking technology got good enough to measure exactly which grip and wrist angle maximized that side spin. Pitchers had thrown slider-adjacent pitches with heavy sweep by accident, without fully understanding why some of their breaking balls moved more sideways than others. Once teams could measure the spin axis pitch by pitch, an entire generation of pitchers essentially re-engineered a weapon that used to be a happy accident, and the league's overall breaking ball shape changed within a handful of seasons. The splitter. Where the sweeper lies about direction, the splitter lies about distance. It's thrown by wedging the ball between the index and middle fingers, spread wider than a normal grip, which strips away much of the backspin a fastball normally carries. Without that backspin holding it up, the pitch drops out of the sky late, not gradually, but almost like the last 10 feet of its flight belonged to a different pitch entirely. The cruelty of the splitter is timing specific. A hitter geared up for a fastball's normal arc commits his swing plane to a ball that's supposed to still be rising or holding steady, and the splitter simply isn't there anymore by the time the bat arrives. It's one of the few pitches in the sport that reliably fools hitters who already know in advance that it's probably coming. The trade-off for all that deception is physical, and it's steep. The wide finger spread required to strip the spin puts unusual strain on the tendons connecting to the elbow, which is a large part of why pitchers who lean heavily on the splitter tend to have shorter windows of peak effectiveness than pitchers built around safer breaking balls. It's a pitch that essentially trades career longevity for a few extra seasons of being nearly unhittable. A bet plenty of pitchers have made anyway, because a good splitter is close to impossible to defend against, even when the hitter knows exactly what's coming. The cutter. The cutter's whole reputation is built on a single number: how little it actually moves. Where a slider might break a foot, a well-thrown cutter shifts just a few inches late, breaking in toward a hitter's hands right as he's already committed to a swing. That's precisely what makes it so devastating. It's close enough to a fastball that a hitter's brain doesn't get the usual early warning a bigger breaking ball provides. That subtlety is also exactly why the pitch took so long to catch on league-wide. For decades, coaches actively discouraged young pitchers from throwing anything resembling a cutter, worried the grip would bleed into and ruin the mechanics of a normal fastball. It took one legendary reliever proving over the better part of 2 decades that a single, barely moving pitch could be thrown almost exclusively and still dominate an entire league before other organizations stopped treating the cutter as a mechanical risk and started treating it as a weapon worth teaching on purpose. The damage shows up in a very specific place: broken bats. A cutter arriving a few inches off where the barrel expects it tends to catch the ball on the handle instead of the sweet spot, snapping maple and ash at a rate no other single pitch type in the sport matches. It's the rare pitch that can get hit hard, technically, and still end the at-bat in the pitcher's favor because the bat simply didn't survive contact. What separates a great cutter from an ordinary one usually isn't the shape of the break at all. It's how long a pitcher can hold the pitch's velocity nearly identical to his fastball before the late shift kicks in. The smaller the visible gap between the two pitches for as long as possible, the less time a hitter's brain has to even suspect he's looking at anything other than a fastball, which is exactly why the cutter has become one of the most copied pitches in the sport over the last 2 decades, despite moving less than almost anything else in a pitcher's arsenal. The 12-6 Curveball. Most breaking balls move on some diagonal angle, mixing horizontal and vertical break in whatever ratio the grip produces. The 12-6 curveball is the rare exception, thrown with a spin axis so close to purely vertical that the pitch appears to drop almost straight down, like a clock hand falling from 12 to 6. It's the single hardest spin axis in the sport to consistently repeat, which is exactly why so few pitchers ever fully commit to throwing one as a primary weapon. Hitters describe facing a great 12-6 curveball as watching a pitch fall off a table. The top half of its flight looks completely ordinary, and then it simply drops out of the strike zone before the swing can adjust. Because there's no horizontal deception involved, hitters who do lay off it correctly make it look almost too easy to identify, right up until the next one arrives a few inches lower and buckles them anyway. The reason so few pitchers throw a true 12-6 is almost entirely mechanical. Producing that nearly pure topspin axis requires releasing the ball directly over the top of the fingers with almost no side pressure at all, a release point that fights against the more natural, slightly angled wrist most pitchers develop from years of throwing every other pitch in their arsenal. Get the release even slightly off, and the pitch drifts toward a more ordinary diagonal curveball. Effective maybe, but missing the exact vertical illusion that makes the true version so uniquely miserable to face. The Screwball. The Screwball is the pitch most likely to end a career trying to master it. It breaks in the opposite direction of a normal curveball, toward a same-handed hitter instead of away from him, which requires twisting the wrist and forearm in a motion the human elbow was never really built to repeat, pitch after pitch, for an entire career. It's largely disappeared from the modern game specifically because of that risk, not because hitters figured it out. When it's thrown well, it's nearly impossible to prepare for, because a hitter's entire mental library of breaking ball reads assumes the ball moves away from him, not toward him. But the pitch essentially punishes the pitcher's body as a toll for confusing the hitter's brain, and very few careers have survived throwing it as a primary pitch for more than a handful of seasons. The pitch's near extinction says almost as much about the sport's priorities as it does about the pitch itself. In an earlier era, when careers were shorter and arm health simply wasn't tracked or protected the way it is now, pitchers threw it anyway, injury risk or not, because a nearly unhittable pitch was worth almost any cost to a team desperate for outs. Modern medical staffs, armed with decades of data on exactly which mechanics wreck an elbow fastest, have made the trade-off calculation for pitchers now, which is the real reason a pitch this effective essentially disappeared from the sport's toolkit, not because hitters ever solved it. The knuckleball. Every pitch on this list relies on spin to create its movement, except this one, which relies on the almost complete absence of it. A knuckleball is thrown with minimal rotation, sometimes less than a single full spin on its way to the plate, which means the seams interact unpredictably with the air around it instead of settling into one consistent, readable path. The result is a pitch that can drift, dip, or dance in a direction that nobody, including the pitcher who just threw it, can reliably predict in advance. This is also the one pitch on this list that has almost nothing to do with arm strength or velocity at all, which is exactly why it's produced some of the sport's most unusual career arcs. Pitchers who couldn't crack a big league roster throwing anything conventional have built entire multi-decade careers on a pitch that barely travels 60 miles an hour, because a knuckleball's effectiveness has essentially nothing to do with how hard the arm attached to it can throw. That unpredictability cuts both ways. On a good night, it's the single hardest pitch in the sport to square up because there's no consistent pattern for a hitter's eyes to lock onto. On a bad night, the same lack of spin that makes it dangerous can leave it floating in without any real movement at all, which is exactly why very few pitchers ever build an entire career around a pitch this genuinely unstable. The pitch is almost as cruel to the people supposedly on its own side. Catchers assigned to receive a knuckleball routinely use oversized mitts specifically designed for the job, because a pitch that moves unpredictably for the batter moves just as unpredictably on its way into the glove. It's the rare pitch type in the sport where a passed ball with nobody on base barely counts as an error against anyone. Everyone in the ballpark, including the battery that just threw and caught it, genuinely didn't know which way it was going. The changeup with fastball arm action. Nothing on this list relies less on the ball's actual movement and more on pure deception than a well-disguised changeup. Thrown with the exact same arm speed and release point as a fastball, but gripped in a way that takes 8 to 12 miles per hour off the pitch, its entire purpose is to sell a lie the hitter's eyes can't catch in time. The pitch doesn't need to move much at all if the arm action sells the fastball convincingly enough. That's precisely why it's considered the hardest pitch in the sport to teach and the easiest to accidentally ruin. A pitcher who even slightly slows his arm to compensate for the changed grip has already tipped the pitch before it leaves his hand, no matter how good the actual velocity gap or movement turns out to be. Which means the pitch's biggest threat isn't a hitter's bat at all. It's the pitcher's own body language giving away the secret half a second too early. The damage is almost always visible in the swing itself, not the pitch. A hitter geared up for a fastball's timing, facing a pitch that arrives a beat later than expected, ends up lunging or rolling his weight forward well before the ball actually gets there. The signature, embarrassing tell of a changeup that worked exactly as designed. What separates an elite changeup from a mediocre one usually comes down to a single measurement: how closely the spin rate and axis match the pitcher's own fastball, not some league-wide ideal. Two pitchers can throw a changeup at the exact same velocity gap and get wildly different results because the pitch's entire job is to mirror one specific pitcher's own fastball signature closely enough that a hitter's brain, trained all season on that exact signature, gets fooled by his own familiarity with the arm in front of him. The sinker. Close with the pitch that wins by staying low instead of getting nasty in the traditional sense. A sinker is thrown with a grip and seam orientation that produces heavy downward sinking movement rather than the natural rise a four-seam fastball creates. Instead of missing the bat entirely, its entire design is built around missing the barrel, inducing contact on the top half of the ball that turns hard-hit line drives into routine ground balls. It's the least flashy pitch on this list and arguably the most quietly devastating, because a great sinker doesn't need a single swing and miss to be effective. An entire outing can go by with the ball in play almost every time, and the box score at the end still reads like a pitcher who dominated the lineup from start to finish, one dead red ground ball at a time. The sinker's real value only shows up when you compare it against the alternative outcomes it's replacing. A line drive, a fly ball, and a ground ball off the exact same swing quality can produce wildly different results for the defense. And a pitcher who consistently converts hard contact into low, chopped ground balls is quietly manipulating the odds in his favor on every single pitch, regardless of how well the hitter actually squared it up. It's the pitch equivalent of winning a game by making sure the other team's best shots simply never had a real chance to go anywhere dangerous. 8 completely different ways to break a hitter's timing, and not one of them relies on pure velocity to do it. That might be the most honest thing this list reveals about the sport. The nastiest pitch in baseball has never really been about how hard you throw it. It's about how convincingly you can lie to a brain that only gets one shot to guess right. Every single pitch on this list, in its own way, is exploiting the exact same half-second weakness. A hitter's decision window is too short for certainty, so the sport has spent over a century rewarding whoever can make that guess feel most certain right up until it's proven catastrophically wrong. The fastest arm in the world still loses to a hitter who correctly guesses what's coming. The nastiest arm in the world wins by making sure he almost never gets the chance to guess correctly in the first place. Thanks for making it through all 8. If one of these finally explains a swing you've seen 100 times and never understood, drop a like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel grow. And if you're into breaking down what makes hitters tick, go check out our last one. Every MLB hitter archetype explained, and the real difference between a slugger and a pure hitter.